She's too senile to notice anyway, my daughter-in-law Cassandra laughed, holding up the bottle of sugar pills she'd been giving me instead of my heart medication. The old bat thinks she's taking her precious pills, but I've been saving us hundreds of dollars every month. I smiled quietly from the kitchen doorway and said, "How thoughtful of you, dear." When the paramedics arrived 3 hours later and she realized what I'd actually been taking all along, her face went completely white. Follow my story until the end, and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far this tale of justice has traveled. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Beatrice Ashford, and at 73 years old, I've learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who share your dinner table. My story begins on a crisp October morning in Millbrook Valley, where I'd lived peacefully for 48 years until my son brought home a woman who would try to kill me with kindness, or more accurately, with complete medical negligence. The morning sun was filtering through my lace curtains as I prepared my weekly pill organizer, a ritual I'd maintained religiously since my heart attack 2 years ago. Dr. Harrison had been very clear about the importance of my medication regimen: metoprolol for my blood pressure, atorvastatin for cholesterol, and most critically, digoxin for my heart rhythm. Missing even a few doses could land me back in Riverside General Hospital, or worse. I was in my bedroom, carefully counting out the small white tablets, when I heard Cassandra's voice drifting up from the kitchen below. She was on the phone, and something about her tone made me pause. There was a smugness there, a self-satisfied quality that I'd noticed more frequently since she'd moved into my house 6 months ago. "Trust me, Rachel," she was saying to whoever was on the other end. "The old woman is completely out of it. She takes whatever pills I give her without even looking. I've been replacing her expensive heart medication with sugar pills from the health food store for 3 months now." My hand froze over the pill bottle. Sugar pills? My heart medication? Cassandra continued, her voice getting more animated. "Do you know how much those prescriptions cost? Nearly $400 a month. And for what? She's probably going to die soon anyway. Why waste money keeping a senile old woman alive when Derek and I could use that money for our honeymoon in Bali?" I felt my chest tighten, but not from my heart condition, from pure, cold rage. "The best part is," Cassandra laughed, "she actually thanks me for helping her with her medications. She thinks I'm being such a caring daughter-in-law, making sure she takes her pills on time. If only she knew she's been taking candy for months." I quietly backed away from my bedroom door and sat heavily on the edge of my bed. My own daughter-in-law, the woman my son Derek had married just 8 months ago, had been systematically trying to kill me, and she was laughing about it. But here's what Cassandra didn't know about me, what she'd never bothered to learn in all the months she'd been living under my roof. Before I retired, I wasn't just some helpless old lady puttering around her garden. I was Dr. Beatrice Ashford, Chief of Cardiology at Riverside General Hospital for 27 years. I'd saved more lives than I could count, published research that was still being cited in medical journals, and trained half the doctors currently practicing in our county. More importantly, I'd been suspicious of Cassandra from the moment Derek brought her home. Something about her story never quite added up. She claimed to be a registered nurse, but whenever medical topics came up in conversation, her knowledge seemed surprisingly shallow. She said she'd worked at Metropolitan General in the city, but when I mentioned colleagues I knew there, she always changed the subject. So 3 months ago, right around the time Cassandra started helping me with my medications, I'd begun my own little investigation. I'd been carefully documenting everything, taking photos of the pills she gave me, recording our conversations with a small device Dr. Patel had recommended when I mentioned feeling confused about my medications. You see, I'd been pretending to be more frail and confused than I actually was, partly to see what Cassandra's true intentions were, and partly because I'd learned that people revealed their worst selves when they think you can't fight back. What Cassandra also didn't know about me, what she'd never bothered to learn in all the months she'd been living under my roof, was that I'd been suspicious of her help that much that I'd been taking my real medications separately, hidden in a bottle marked as vitamins that I kept in my sewing room. Every morning, after gratefully accepting whatever pills she gave me, I'd excuse myself to work on my quilting and take my actual heart medication.
I'd also been keeping the sugar pills she'd been giving me, collecting them in a small jar as evidence. But I hadn't been sure what to do with this information until this morning, when I heard her confessing everything to her friend Rachel with such callous cruelty. Now, sitting on my bed with the sound of her laughter still echoing from downstairs, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Cassandra thought she was dealing with a senile old woman who couldn't tell the difference between life-saving medication and candy. She was about to learn that some of us elderly folks have been around long enough to know exactly how to handle people who try to take advantage of our supposed weakness. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Detective Morrison owed me a favor from when I'd saved his mother's life during a particularly complicated cardiac procedure 5 years ago. It was time to call in that debt. But first, I wanted to give Cassandra one more chance to dig her grave a little deeper. I stood up, smoothed my house dress, and made my way downstairs with the shuffle I'd been perfecting for months. Just a harmless old lady grateful for help with her confusing medications. "Cassandra, dear," I called out as I entered the kitchen where she was still on the phone, "could you help me with my morning pills? I'm feeling a bit confused about which ones to take." She covered the phone with her hand and smiled at me with what I now recognized as completely fake sweetness. "Of course, Grandmother Beatrice. Let me just finish this call and I'll be right there." I smiled back, the same peaceful, trusting smile I'd been giving her for months. "Take your time, dear. I'll just wait right here." As she continued her phone conversation, still bragging about her clever scheme to defraud a helpless old woman, I quietly activated the recording app on my phone. Today, Cassandra was going to learn the difference between senility and strategy. And by the time this day was over, she'd understand that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The pills she thought were slowly killing me had actually been keeping me alive. But her plan to steal from me and potentially cause my death? That was about to kill her future in ways she couldn't even imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house at 47 Maple Grove Lane had been my sanctuary for nearly 5 decades. Harold and I had bought it as newlyweds in 1976, when the neighborhood was filled with young families and the American dream felt achievable on a doctor's salary. Now the morning light that once brought me comfort seemed different somehow, filtered through the presence of someone I was beginning to realize had never belonged here. I made my way to my favorite armchair in the living room, the burgundy velvet one Harold had surprised me with for our 10th anniversary. From here, I had a clear view of the kitchen, where Cassandra was still chattering away on her phone, gesturing animatedly as she described her clever scheme to her friend. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was confessing to attempted murder while standing next to the refrigerator covered with photos of our family gatherings, including several where she was beaming beside my son Derek, playing the role of the devoted new wife. Derek. My heart ached thinking about my only child, my brilliant son who worked as a software engineer downtown at Morrison Tech Solutions. He'd been so lonely after his divorce from Patricia 3 years ago, so eager to find love again that he'd rushed headlong into marriage after knowing her for only 6 months. When he'd brought her home for Christmas last year, I'd wanted so desperately to like her, to see what he saw in this vibrant woman with her cascade of auburn hair and infectious laugh. But Derek had been so happy, and I'd convinced myself that my concerns were just the natural wariness of a mother who wasn't ready to share her son's affections. When they'd announced their engagement in March, I'd thrown them a celebration dinner right here in this dining room, using my finest china and serving Harold's favorite recipe for braised lamb. The wedding had been beautiful, held in the gardens of Willowbrook Country Club on a perfect May afternoon. Cassandra had looked radiant in her flowing white gown, and Derek had cried actual tears of joy when she'd promised to love and honor him through sickness and health, for richer or poorer. I'd cried too, thinking about how proud Harold would have been to see our son so happy. The request to move in had come just 2 weeks after they returned from their honeymoon in Tuscany. Cassandra had approached it so sweetly, so logically. Their apartment lease was up, and with Derek traveling more for work, she'd be worried about me living alone in this big house at my age. "What if something happened to you, Grandmother Beatrice?" she said, using the endearing name she'd adopted for me. "What if you fell or had another heart episode? I'd never forgive myself if I wasn't here to help." Derek had been enthusiastic about the arrangement. "It's perfect, Mom. Cassandra can keep an eye on you, help with the house maintenance, and you'll have company. Plus, we can save money for our own house while helping you with expenses." I'd agreed, partly because the house did feel too large and quiet since Harold's death, and partly because I genuinely wanted to build a relationship with my new daughter-in-law. The first few weeks had been pleasant enough. Cassandra had been attentive and helpful, cooking healthy meals, organizing my medications, driving me to doctor's appointments when Derek was traveling. But gradually, I'd begun to notice small things that didn't quite add up. When Dr. Harrison had asked her about my medication schedule during one visit, her answers had been vague, imprecise. She'd claimed to have experience with cardiac patients, but when I'd mentioned specific medical terms, she'd looked blank or changed the subject. Most concerning, she'd begun insisting on handling all my medications personally, brushing off my attempts to manage them myself. "Don't worry about all those confusing pill bottles, Grandmother Beatrice," she'd say with her bright smile. "That's what I'm here for. You just focus on enjoying your retirement." From the kitchen, I could hear her voice getting more animated. "The best part is how grateful she is," Cassandra was telling her friend. "She actually hugs me and tells me what a blessing I am to the family. If only she knew I'm saving Derek thousands of dollars by letting her slowly poison herself with sugar." I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling my blood pressure rise in a way that had nothing to do with my medical condition. This woman, who had eaten at my table, slept under my roof, and accepted my family's love and trust, was literally trying to kill me while stealing from my son. And she found it amusing. But what Cassandra couldn't see from the kitchen was the small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. She thought she was dealing with a confused, dependent old woman who needed her help to survive. She had no idea that Dr. Beatrice Ashford had spent decades learning to read people, to spot deception, and to protect herself and her patients from those who would do harm. The medical training never really leaves you. After 27 years of making life and death decisions, of catching mistakes that could kill patients, of dealing with insurance fraud and medication errors, you develop instincts that keep working long after you hang up your stethoscope. Those instincts had been screaming warnings about Cassandra for months. I'd been playing the role of the grateful, declining elderly relative because I needed to know the truth. Was Cassandra simply careless with my medications, or was something more sinister happening? Was she making honest mistakes, or was this deliberate? Now I had my answer, recorded in her own words, spoken with the casual cruelty of someone who thought her victim was too far gone to fight back. I reached into the drawer of the side table beside my chair and pulled out a leather portfolio I'd been keeping there for weeks. Inside were photocopies of my medical records, documentation of my actual cognitive function, copies of my real prescriptions, and photographs of the sugar pills Cassandra had been giving me. I'd also included a detailed timeline of her behavior, her inconsistencies about her nursing background, and records of unusual financial activity I'd noticed in the household accounts. You see, Derek had given Cassandra access to my checking account to help with household expenses, and I'd been monitoring every transaction. In the past 3 months, there had been several large purchases that had nothing to do with my care or our household needs. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, spa treatments, and most tellingly, payments to a travel agency for what looked like a very expensive trip to Bali.
Cassandra thought she was stealing from a senile old woman who wouldn't notice. What she didn't realize was that she was stealing from someone who had been tracking every penny, every lie, and every attempt on her life. As I listened to her continue bragging about her scheme, I opened my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd added just last week, Detective Janet Morrison, my former patient's daughter who now worked in the Financial Crimes Division of the Millbrook Valley Police Department. It was time for Cassandra to learn that underestimating Dr. Beatrice Ashford was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. Cassandra finally ended her phone call and turned toward me with that practiced smile I'd grown to recognize as completely hollow. She moved through the kitchen with the confident stride of someone who believed she held all the power in our relationship, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors Derek had refinished as a surprise for my 70th birthday. "Sorry about that, Grandmother Beatrice," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That was my friend Rachel from nursing school. She was asking for advice about caring for elderly patients." The lie came so easily to her that I almost admired the smoothness of it. Almost. She approached me carrying a small white pill organizer, the same one she'd been using to dispense my medications for the past 3 months. From my position in the armchair, I could see the contents clearly. Several white tablets that looked remarkably similar to my actual heart medication, but which I now knew were nothing more than compressed sugar designed to slowly kill me. "Time for your morning pills, sweetie," she announced, settling onto the ottoman directly in front of my chair. This close, I could smell her expensive perfume, something French and floral that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Her manicured nails were perfectly painted in a shade of coral that matched her silk blouse, and her makeup was flawless despite the early hour. Everything about her screamed high maintenance and expensive tastes, tastes that apparently justified murdering an elderly woman for her money. "Ah, thank you, dear," I replied, allowing my voice to carry just the right note of grateful confusion. "You're so good to me. I don't know what I'd do without your help managing all these confusing medications." Her smile widened, and I saw something that made my stomach turn. Genuine pleasure. She was enjoying this. The power, the deception, the slow murder disguised as caregiving. This wasn't just about money for Cassandra. She was actually taking satisfaction in what she believed was my gradual decline. "It's no trouble at all," she said, shaking the pills into her palm. "That's what family is for, right? Taking care of each other." She held out the tablets, watching as I reached for them with hands I made tremble slightly more than necessary. As I pretended to examine the pills with confusion, I noticed something new. Today's batch looked different somehow. Slightly more yellowish than usual. Had she switched suppliers? Was she getting careless? Or was this some kind of escalation? "These look a little different than yesterday's pills," I observed, making my voice sound worried and uncertain. Cassandra didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that's just because we got them from a different pharmacy," she explained smoothly. "Dr. Harrison said it was fine to switch as long as the dosage is the same. You know how these generic medications can look slightly different from different manufacturers?" Another lie, delivered with such casual confidence that I realized she'd probably been practicing these explanations. She'd thought through potential questions and prepared answers designed to confuse and reassure an elderly woman who supposedly couldn't think clearly anymore. I made a show of relaxing, nodding slowly as if her explanation had satisfied my concerns. "Of course, dear. I'm sorry for questioning you. I know you only want the best for me." "Exactly," she said, her relief barely concealed. "Now take your pills with some water, and then I thought we could work on organizing your closet today. You have so many beautiful clothes that you never wear anymore." There it was, another probe into my possessions. Over the past few weeks, Cassandra had been systematically going through my belongings under the guise of helping me organize. She'd already convinced me to donate several pieces of Harold's jewelry that she claimed I'd never wear, along with some artwork she suggested was cluttering the living room. I'd gone along with it, curious to see how far she'd push, but now I understood this was part of a larger plan to liquidate my assets while I was supposedly too confused to notice. I took the fake pills and palmed them expertly, a sleight of hand I'd perfected during my years of dealing with psychiatric patients who sometimes refused their medication. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, lifting my water glass to my lips and pretending to swallow the tablets. Cassandra watched carefully, and I saw her mentally checking off another successful dose in what I was beginning to realize was probably a carefully calculated timeline. How long had she determined it would take for the lack of real medication to kill me? 3 months? 6 months? Had she done research on cardiac patients and medication withdrawal, or was she simply hoping for the best? "Perfect," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Now, about that closet. I noticed you have some lovely vintage pieces that might be worth something to collectors. We could look into selling them and putting the money into your savings account. For your care as you get older." My care. As if she hadn't just given me sugar pills that could cause a cardiac event at any moment if I were actually depending on them for my heart rhythm. The clinical detachment with which she discussed my future while actively working to ensure I didn't have one was perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire situation. "That sounds wonderful," I agreed, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "You're so thoughtful to help me with these things. Derek is so lucky to have found someone who cares about family the way you do." At the mention of Derek, something flickered across Cassandra's face. Annoyance, maybe, or guilt. It was the first crack I'd seen in her perfect facade, and it told me something important. Whatever feelings she might have had for my son, they were secondary to her interest in what our family could provide her financially. "Derek works so hard," she said, her voice taking on a slightly different tone. "He deserves to have nice things, to travel, to enjoy life while he's young. He shouldn't have to worry about expensive medical bills or long-term care costs eating up his inheritance." There it was, the real motivation laid bare. This wasn't just about greed, it was about securing Derek's financial future by eliminating the burden of caring for his aging mother. In Cassandra's twisted logic, she was doing Derek a favor by murdering me, freeing him from the responsibility and expense of my care, while ensuring he inherited my estate sooner rather than later. The truly horrifying part was how she'd probably convinced herself this was almost altruistic. She wasn't just a gold digger, she was a gold digger with a savior complex, believing she was protecting Derek from difficult decisions by making them for him in the most permanent way possible. "You're absolutely right," I said, allowing a note of sadness to creep into my voice. "I sometimes worry that I'm becoming a burden to him. Maybe it would be better if—" "Oh, don't think like that," Cassandra interrupted quickly, but her eyes were bright with interest. "We just need to make sure everything is properly planned for, legally and financially. Have you given any thought to updating your will lately?" And there it was. The next phase of her plan. Not content to simply kill me with medical negligence, she wanted to ensure that the financial benefits flowed exactly where she intended. I realized with cool certainty that Derek probably had no idea what his wife was planning, that he was as much a victim of her manipulation as I was. "I should probably talk to my lawyer about that," I said, thoughtfully. "Oh, I know a wonderful estate attorney, someone who specializes in elder care planning. I could set up an appointment for us next week." Her own lawyer, no doubt, someone who would help structure my will in ways that would benefit Cassandra while making it look like my own decision. The scope of her planning was becoming clearer, and I realized I was dealing with someone far more dangerous than a simple opportunist.
This was a predator who had studied her prey, planned her approach, and was executing a complex scheme to commit the perfect murder while stealing everything I'd worked my entire life for. But as I sat there, nodding agreeably to her suggestions, I felt a familiar calm settling over me. It was the same feeling I had in the operating room during critical procedures, when everything depended on steady hands and clear thinking. Cassandra thought she was playing chess with someone who didn't even know the rules.
She was about to discover that Dr. Beatrice Ashford had been playing this game much longer than she had, and I'd already planned my winning move. 20 minutes later, as Cassandra busied herself in the kitchen preparing what she called a heart-healthy lunch, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Harrison's office, and I felt my pulse quicken, not from any cardiac issue, but from anticipation. This was the call I'd been expecting, the one that would either confirm my worst fears or prove that I'd been overthinking Cassandra's behavior. "I'll get it," Cassandra called out immediately, her voice sharp with sudden alertness. She'd been monitoring my phone calls for weeks now, always ready with an excuse to intercept or listen in. "You just rest, Grandmother Beatrice." "Oh, that's all right, dear," I said, reaching for the phone with movements I made deliberately slow and uncertain. "It's probably just Dr. Harrison's office about my upcoming appointment." I watched Cassandra's face carefully as I answered. "Hello, this is Beatrice." "Mrs. Ashford, this is Nancy from Dr. Harrison's office," came the familiar voice of his longtime nurse. "I'm calling because we've received some concerning information, and Dr. Harrison would like to speak with you immediately." My heart rate actually did increase then, but not from fear, from validation. "What kind of concerning information?" Nancy's voice was professional, but worried. "We received a call this morning from someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law, asking about changing your prescription medications. She said you were having adverse reactions and wanted to switch to alternative treatments. When we asked for your authorization, she became very insistent that she had your power of attorney for medical decisions." I saw Cassandra freeze in the kitchen doorway, her face going pale. She'd been listening, of course, and now she realized her careful plan was beginning to unravel. "I never gave anyone power of attorney for my medical decisions," I said clearly, making sure my voice carried to where Cassandra stood, "and I certainly didn't authorize anyone to call your office about changing my medications." That's exactly what concerned us, especially since this person seemed to have detailed knowledge about your prescriptions but couldn't answer basic questions about your medical history. Dr. Harrison wants to see you today if possible. He's very worried about medication tampering or elder abuse. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Cassandra's carefully constructed facade was cracking before my eyes. Her confident smile had vanished, replaced with something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Of course," I said into the phone. "I can be there this afternoon. Should I bring my current medications for review?" "Yes, please bring everything you're currently taking. Dr. Harrison wants to verify that what you have matches what we prescribed." As I hung up the phone, I turned to look at Cassandra, who had gone pale to ashen. For the first time since she'd moved into my home, she looked genuinely frightened. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. "What did they want?" "Oh, it's probably nothing," I said, maintaining my confused elderly woman act. "Apparently, someone called Dr. Harrison's office, asking about my medications. They seemed to think it was suspicious, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Cassandra's hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the kitchen counter. "Did they say who called?" I replied innocently. "They said it was someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law. Can you imagine? Why would anyone pretend to be you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Cassandra's mind was clearly racing, trying to figure out how to explain her way out of this situation. I could almost see her calculating the risks, wondering how much she knew, how much she suspected.
Maybe it was a scammer, she finally said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. You know how identity thieves target elderly people. Someone probably got your information and was trying to manipulate your medical care. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind that might have worked on someone who truly was confused and trusting. But I could see the sweat beading on her forehead, the way her eyes kept darting toward the door as if she was planning an escape route. You're probably right, I agreed, but Dr. Harrison wants to see me this afternoon just to be safe. He wants me to bring all my current medications for review. If possible, Cassandra went even paler. All your medications? Yes, everything I'm currently taking. He wants to make sure they match what he prescribed. I paused, watching her carefully. You've been so helpful organizing my pills, dear. Maybe you could help me gather them up. I'm not sure that's necessary. I mean, if someone was just trying to scam you, there's probably no real problem with your actual medications. But it was too late. The damage was done, and we both knew it. When Dr. Harrison analyzed the sugar pills she'd been giving me, the truth would be undeniable. Cassandra's carefully orchestrated murder plot would be exposed in the most humiliating way possible by the very medical professional she'd tried to circumvent.
My phone buzzed with a text message. Hey, Mom. Hope you're having a good day. Cassandra mentioned you might need to see Dr. Harrison today. I can leave work early if you need a ride. I looked up at Cassandra, who was reading the message over my shoulder. Did you tell Derek about the doctor's appointment? I thought he should know, she said weakly, in case you needed help. Another lie. Derek's text had arrived too quickly after my phone call for her to have contacted him normally. She had probably texted him the moment she heard Nancy mention medication tampering, trying to get ahead of the story and control the narrative. That's very thoughtful, I said, typing back, Thank you, sweetheart. I'll let you know if I need anything. As I sent the message, Cassandra's phone started ringing. She looked at the screen and went completely white. It's Derek, she whispered. Well, answer it, I said cheerfully. He's probably just worried about me. With shaking hands, Cassandra accepted the call. Hi, honey, she said, her voice barely steady. Even from across the room, I could hear Derek's concerned voice through the phone's speaker. Cassandra, what's going on? Your text made it sound like Mom was having some kind of medical emergency. Is her heart acting up again? No, nothing like that, Cassandra said quickly. It's just a routine appointment. Someone called the doctor's office about her medications and they want to check everything out. Someone called about Mom's medications? Who would do that? I watched Cassandra struggle with the question, knowing that any answer she gave would either be a lie or an admission of guilt. The doctor's office thinks it might have been a scammer, she finally said. A scammer interested in Mom's heart medication? That doesn't make sense. Derek's voice was getting sharper, more concerned. Mom, are you there? Are you okay? I took the phone from Cassandra's trembling hands. I'm fine, sweetheart. Dr. Harrison just wants to see me to make sure everything is all right with my medications. I'm coming home, Derek said immediately. Something about this doesn't feel right. I'll drive you to the appointment myself. As I hung up the phone, I saw pure terror in Cassandra's eyes. She knew that once Derek arrived, once we went to Dr. Harrison's office, once the truth came out about the sugar pills, her entire world would collapse. The woman who had spent months slowly poisoning me while laughing about my supposed senility was about to face the consequences of underestimating her victim. But she still had no idea just how thoroughly I'd been documenting her crimes, or how many other people were about to become involved in bringing her to justice. The phone call from Dr. Harrison's office was just the beginning of Cassandra's very bad day. The 30 minutes between Derek's call and his arrival felt like hours. I sat in my armchair, maintaining my serene grandmother facade while watching Cassandra pace the living room like a caged animal. She kept checking her phone, running her hands through her perfectly styled hair, and glancing toward the front door as if considering whether she could simply disappear before Derek arrived.
Maybe I should start dinner, she said suddenly, her voice brittle with forced normalcy. Derek will be hungry when he gets home. That's very thoughtful, dear, I replied, though we both knew the last thing on anyone's mind right now was food. I watched her retreat to the kitchen, probably grateful for any activity that might distract her from the inevitable confrontation approaching. From my chair, I could see her opening and closing cabinet doors aimlessly, her movements jerky and unfocused. At one point, she pulled out her phone and started typing frantically, then stopped and deleted whatever she had written. I wondered if she was trying to craft some explanation for Derek, some way to frame the situation that wouldn't make her look like the attempted murderer she was. The sound of Derek's BMW pulling into the driveway sent a visible shudder through Cassandra. She froze in the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity for her. After all, she was about to lose everything she'd schemed to gain. But then I remembered her laughter on the phone that morning, her casual cruelty as she had described slowly killing me with fake medication, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated.
Derek burst through the front door with an urgency I hadn't seen since he was a teenager racing home to make curfew. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, his hair mussed from running his hands through it during what must have been a frantic drive from downtown. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked, crossing directly to my chair and kneeling beside it. His eyes searched my face with the kind of intense concern that reminded me of Harold when I'd first been diagnosed with my heart condition. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured him, reaching out to smooth his rumpled hair the way I had when he was small. "Just a little confused about all this fuss over my medications." Derek turned toward Cassandra, who was hovering in the kitchen doorway, looking like she might be sick. "Cassandra, what exactly happened? Your text was pretty vague." I watched my daughter-in-law struggle to find words. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Someone called Dr. Harrison's office, pretending to be me," she said, finally. "They were asking about changing Beatrice's medications. The office thought it was suspicious." "But why would someone do that?" Derek asked, his confusion genuine. "What would be the point of impersonating you to mess with Mom's heart medication?" The question hung in the air, and I could see Cassandra realizing she'd painted herself into a corner. Any logical answer would lead to more questions she couldn't answer without incriminating herself. I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe they were trying to hurt her somehow." Derek's face darkened. Someone was trying to hurt Mom by messing with her cardiac medication? That's not just fraud, that's attempted murder. The word murder hit Cassandra like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, gripping the doorframe for support. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything right then and there, but she managed to hold herself together. "We don't know that," she said quickly. "It could have been a mistake, or confusion, or—" "Cassandra." Derek's voice was sharp now, cutting through her rambling excuses. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and I saw him register something in her expression that made his own face go pale. My son was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He'd been married to this woman for months, living with her daily, and he was finally seeing something that didn't match the person he thought he'd fallen in love with. "You're terrified," he said slowly. "Why are you terrified about someone calling about Mom's medications, unless—" He trailed off, the implication hitting him like a freight train. "Unless what?" Cassandra demanded, but her voice cracked on the words. Derek stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. "You know more about this than you're telling me." The silence that followed was excruciating. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of neighborhood children playing in their yards. Normal sounds of a normal day, except nothing about this day was normal anymore. "Derek, honey, you're scaring me," Cassandra said, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "I don't understand why you're looking at me like that."
Because the woman I married wouldn't be falling apart over a phone call about medication fraud unless she was involved somehow. Because the woman I married would be outraged that someone tried to mess with my mother's heart medication, not making excuses for them. I watched my son connect the dots in real time, saw the exact moment when the horrible truth began to dawn on him. His face went from confused to horrified to devastated in the span of seconds. Oh, God. Cassandra, tell me you didn't. Tell me you wouldn't. I don't know what you're talking about, but the words came out too fast, too desperate. Derek turned to me, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. Mom, your medications, the ones Cassandra has been giving you. When was the last time you actually saw the prescription bottles? I blinked at him with carefully crafted confusion. I don't remember, sweetheart. Cassandra handles all of that for me. She's so good about making sure I take the right pills at the right time. The look Derek gave his wife was of absolute horror. He said quietly, "Show me." Show me what? Show me Mom's medications, the actual prescription bottles, right now. Cassandra's composure finally cracked completely. Derek, please, you don't understand. Show me the bottles, he roared, his voice echoing through the house. I had never heard my gentle son raise his voice like that, and the raw pain in it made my own heart ache. This wasn't just about discovering his wife's crimes. This was about realizing that the woman he'd loved and trusted had been systematically trying to murder his mother while he slept peacefully beside him every night.
Cassandra began to sob, great heaving cries that might have seemed like genuine distress if I hadn't heard her laughing about my impending death just hours earlier. "I can explain," she gasped between sobs. "It's not what you think." "Then explain," Derek said, his voice now deadly calm. "Explain why my wife is falling apart when someone asks to see my mother's heart medication. Explain why you look like you're about to confess to murder." At the word murder, Cassandra's legs gave out entirely. She slid down the doorframe to sit on the kitchen floor, her designer clothes wrinkled, her perfect makeup running in black streams down her cheeks. She looked nothing like the confident, beautiful woman who had swept into our family and stolen my son's heart. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Derek stared at his wife, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. I felt tears prick my own eyes. Not for Cassandra's predicament, but for my son's pain, as he realized the depth of his wife's betrayal. "How far?" Derek asked, his voice barely audible. "How far did what go, Cassandra?" But before she could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Dr. Harrison's familiar figure on my porch, along with someone I didn't recognize. A woman in a business suit, carrying what looked like an official badge. Derek looked at me with growing alarm. "Mom, did you call the police?" "No, sweetheart," I said honestly. "I just called Dr. Harrison's office back to confirm my appointment time." As Derek moved toward the front door, I caught Cassandra's eye one last time. The woman who had spent months planning my death was about to discover that her victim had been planning too, and my plans were about to destroy her life just as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Derek opened the front door to reveal Dr. Harrison standing beside a tall woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a navy blazer with a badge clipped to the pocket that read, "Detective Janet Morrison, Financial Crimes Division." "Mrs. Ashford," Dr. Harrison said, his voice filled with concern, "I hope you don't mind, but when I heard about the situation with your medications, I felt it was important to involve Detective Morrison. She specializes in elder abuse cases." I stood up from my chair with what I hoped appeared to be confused uncertainty. "Elder abuse? But Dr. Harrison, I don't understand. I thought this was just about someone making a prank call to your office." Detective Morrison stepped forward, her trained eyes immediately taking in the scene. Derek's disheveled appearance,
Cassandra still collapsed on the kitchen floor in tears, and me standing between them looking bewildered and frail. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm Detective Morrison. I've been investigating a pattern of elder abuse cases in Millbrook Valley, and when Dr. Harrison contacted me about the suspicious call regarding your medications, it raised some red flags." "What kind of red flags?" Derek asked, though his voice suggested he was dreading the answer. Dr. Harrison opened his medical bag and pulled out a small testing kit. "Mrs. Ashford, I'd like to test the medications you've been taking recently. The person who called my office this morning seemed to have detailed knowledge about your prescriptions, but couldn't answer basic questions about your medical history. That's typically a sign of medication tampering." From the kitchen floor, Cassandra let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a moan. Detective Morrison's sharp eyes immediately focused on her. "And you are?" the detective asked. "Cassandra Ashford," Derek answered when his wife seemed incapable of speech. "She's my wife and she's been helping care for my mother." "I see," Detective Morrison said, making a note in a small pad she'd pulled from her pocket. "And Mrs. Cassandra Ashford, you seem quite distressed about a routine medication check." I watched this unfold with what I hoped appeared to be growing alarm. "Detective Morrison, surely you don't think Cassandra would hurt me? She's been so helpful with my medications. I don't know what I would have done without her." The detective's eyebrows raised slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, when was the last time you actually handled your own medications?" "Well, I paused, allowing confusion to cloud my features. "Cassandra has been organizing them for me. She says it's safer that way since I sometimes get confused about the dosages." "Derek, Mom," Derek said softly, kneeling beside my chair again. "Can you show Dr. Harrison where you keep your medication bottles?" I looked between Derek and Dr. Harrison with apparent uncertainty. "I think they're in the kitchen. Cassandra keeps them organized in a special box." Dr. Harrison and Detective Morrison exchanged a meaningful look. "Mrs. Ashford, would you mind if we examined those medications now?" "Of course not, though I'm not sure what you're looking for."
As we moved toward the kitchen, Cassandra seemed to rouse herself from her stupor. She struggled to her feet, wiping her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. "Wait," she said, her voice hoarse. "You can't just come into our home and start accusing people of things." Detective Morrison turned to face her fully. "Ma'am, I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet. We're simply investigating a report of potential medication fraud. Unless you have some reason to object to that investigation?" The challenge in her voice was clear, and I saw Cassandra realize she was trapped. Any objection she raised would only make her look more guilty, but allowing the investigation to proceed would expose her crimes. "No, of course not," she stammered. "I just think you're making a big deal out of nothing." Dr. Harrison had found the pill organizer that Cassandra used to dispense my daily medications. He opened it carefully, examining the contents with a small magnifying glass he'd pulled from his bag. "Mrs. Ashford," he said after a moment, "these tablets don't look like the digoxin I prescribed for you." I moved closer, squinting at the pills with apparent confusion. "They don't? But Cassandra said they were the same medication, just from a different pharmacy." "Did she now?" Detective Morrison's voice had taken on a distinctly colder tone. She was looking directly at Cassandra, who had gone pale again. Dr. Harrison pulled out a small testing strip and touched it to one of the pills. Within seconds, it changed color. "These aren't digoxin. They're not any cardiac medication at all. They appear to be primarily sugar with some binding agents." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He staggered backward, gripping the kitchen counter for support. "Sugar pills? Cassandra, you've been giving my mother sugar pills instead of her heart medication?" "Derek, I can explain," Cassandra began desperately. "Explain what?" Derek's voice was rising again. "Explain how you've been trying to kill my mother." "I wasn't trying to kill anyone," Cassandra protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Detective Morrison had pulled out her phone and was making a call.
This is Morrison. I need a patrol unit at 47 Maple Grove Lane immediately. We have a confirmed case of elder abuse involving medication tampering. The reality of the situation seemed to hit Cassandra all at once. No, wait, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Then what is it? Derek demanded, because it looks like my wife has been slowly poisoning my mother while pretending to take care of her. I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, allowing my face to show the shock and bewilderment that any elderly victim would feel upon discovering such a betrayal. Cassandra, why would you do this to me? I trusted you. I welcomed you into my family. The pain in my voice wasn't entirely feigned. While I'd known about her crimes for months, seeing the devastation on Derek's face as he realized the depth of his wife's betrayal was genuinely heartbreaking. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, Cassandra said, tears streaming down her face again. I just thought if she took fewer pills, maybe she'd feel better. The side effects from all that medication seemed so harsh. It was a pathetic attempt at an excuse, and everyone in the room knew it. Dr. Harrison shook his head grimly. Mrs. Ashford requires digoxin to regulate her heart rhythm. Without it, she could have suffered cardiac arrhythmia, heart failure, or sudden cardiac death. Replacing life-saving medication with sugar pills isn't alternative medicine, it's attempted murder. The word murder seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet kitchen. Derek was staring at his wife with an expression of complete revulsion, while Detective Morrison continued taking notes, building what I was sure would become a very strong case against Cassandra. Derek, Cassandra pleaded, reaching toward him, please, you have to believe me. I love you. I love your mother. I would never intentionally hurt anyone. Derek stepped away from her outstretched hand. Love? You call this love? Mom could have died, Cassandra. Her heart could have stopped at any moment because you were giving her candy instead of medication. The sound of sirens in the distance indicated that Detective Morrison's backup was arriving. Through the kitchen window, I could see neighbors beginning to gather on their porches, drawn by the unusual activity at the normally quiet Ashford house. Mrs. Ashford, Detective Morrison said, turning to me with professional compassion, I know this must be very shocking for you. Is there someone else who can stay with you tonight? Family or friends? I looked up at her with what I hoped appeared to be vulnerable gratitude. Derek will stay with me, won't you, sweetheart? Of course, Mom, Derek said immediately, though his voice was thick with emotion. I'm not leaving you alone after this.
As the sound of the patrol cars grew closer, I allowed myself a small, sad smile. Cassandra had no idea that this was just the beginning of her problems. She thought the worst thing that could happen was being arrested for medication tampering. She had no idea about the recordings I'd made, the financial evidence I'd gathered, or the comprehensive case I'd been building against her for months. She thought she was facing charges for being a careless caregiver. She was about to discover that she was facing charges for conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder, all meticulously documented by the woman she thought was too senile to notice her own slow assassination. 2 police officers entered my kitchen just as Detective Morrison was placing Cassandra under arrest for elder abuse and medication tampering. As they read her rights, I excused myself quietly, telling everyone I needed to sit down because the shock was overwhelming me. What I actually needed was to retrieve something from my bedroom that would turn this investigation from a simple abuse case into something much more comprehensive. Derek, sweetheart, I called from the hallway, my voice carrying just the right note of frail confusion. Could you help me for a moment? I think there's something Detective Morrison should see. Derek immediately left the kitchen where Cassandra was being handcuffed while sobbing protests about misunderstandings and good intentions. He found me in my bedroom, standing beside the mahogany armoire that had belonged to his grandmother. What is it, Mom? He asked gently, though his eyes still held the shock of discovering his wife's crimes. I opened the bottom drawer of the armoire and pulled out a large manila envelope, thick with documents. I've been keeping some papers, I said carefully, things that worried me about Cassandra's behavior. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid, but now... Derek's eyes widened as he saw the envelope's contents. Mom, what is all this?
Insurance, I said simply. 3 months ago, I started documenting things that didn't seem right. I hoped I was wrong about my suspicions, but I wanted to be prepared if I wasn't. I handed him a smaller envelope from within the larger one. These are photographs of the pills Cassandra has been giving me, taken every day for the past 12 weeks. I've been dating them and storing the actual pills in small bags. Derek opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of clear plastic bags, each labeled with a date and containing several white tablets. Accompanying each bag was a photograph showing the pills alongside a ruler for scale and a newspaper with the date clearly visible. "Mom," Derek whispered, his voice filled with amazement, "you've been collecting evidence this whole time?" "A lifetime of medical training teaches you to document everything," I explained, "especially when someone's life might be in danger." From the kitchen, we could hear Detective Morrison's voice growing more intense as she questioned Cassandra. I pulled out another folder from the envelope. "These are copies of my actual prescriptions," I said, handing Derek a thick sheaf of papers. "Every month, I've been photographing the real medications Dr. Harrison prescribed, then photographing what Cassandra actually gave me. The differences are quite clear." Derek flipped through the documentation, his medical software engineer mind immediately grasping the systematic nature of what I'd done. "This is incredible, Mom. You've basically created a complete forensic timeline." "There's more," I said quietly. I pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind used for dictating medical notes. I've been recording our conversations. Not all of them, just the ones where Cassandra said things that concerned me. I pressed play on the most recent recording, Cassandra's phone call from that morning, where she bragged to her friend Rachel about replacing my medication with sugar pills and laughed about my supposed senility. Derek's face went through a series of expressions as he listened to his wife's casual cruelty. "She's been planning this for months," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Actually, I think it goes back much further than that," I said, pulling out yet another folder. "I've been tracking some financial irregularities as well." This folder contained printouts of bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. I'd highlighted charges that seemed suspicious. Expensive purchases made with my credit card that Cassandra had claimed were for household necessities. Transfers from my checking account to cover medical expenses that never appeared on any actual medical bills. And payments to a travel agency for what appeared to be an elaborate vacation. "Derek, gently," I said. "Did you know that Cassandra has been using my financial information to book a 3-week trip to Bali for your anniversary?" Derek's face went white. "That's impossible. We don't have money for anything like that." According to these records, the trip cost nearly $15,000, all charged to my accounts. The reservation was made using my credit card, but the traveler information lists both you and Cassandra. Derek stared at the travel documents with growing horror. "I never agreed to any expensive trip. We talked about maybe going to the mountains for a long weekend, something we could actually afford."
"I'm afraid there's more," I said, producing another set of documents. "These are records of attempts to contact my attorney's office. Someone calling themselves Mrs. Derek Ashford has been trying to get information about my will and estate planning." The blood drained from Derek's face entirely. "Mom, I need you to know that I never asked Cassandra to do any of this. I had no idea she was stealing from you or trying to change your will or—" "I know, sweetheart," I said, reaching out to touch his arm. "That's why I documented everything so carefully. I needed to be able to prove that you weren't involved in any of this." Derek sank onto the edge of my bed, overwhelmed by the scope of his wife's deception. "How long have you known?" "I started suspecting something was wrong about 6 weeks after she moved in," I admitted. "Little things at first. She claimed to be a nurse, but her knowledge of medical terminology was surprisingly limited. She said she'd worked at Metropolitan General, but when I mentioned colleagues I knew there, she always seemed confused." I sat down beside Derek on the bed. Then I noticed she was always eager to handle my medications, even when I said I could manage them myself. She insisted on organizing my pills, driving me to appointments, even sitting in on consultations with Dr. Harrison. "You mean she was trying to control your medical care?" "Completely.
And when I started paying closer attention to how I felt after taking the pills she gave me, I realized something was very wrong. My energy levels were better than they'd been in months, my heart rhythm felt more stable, and I wasn't experiencing any of the side effects I normally get from my medications. Derek looked puzzled. But wouldn't that mean the fake pills were actually helping you? I smiled sadly. No, sweetheart. It meant that about 2 weeks after I started suspecting something was wrong, I began palming the pills she gave me instead of actually swallowing them. Then I'd go to my sewing room and take my real medications, which I had hidden in a vitamin bottle. The revelation hit Derek like a thunderbolt. You've been outsmarting her this whole time? I've been protecting myself while gathering evidence, I corrected. If I had confronted her without proof, it would have been my word against hers. But with 3 months of documentation, photographs, recordings, and financial records, you've built a case that no defense attorney could argue with, Derek finished, his software background helping him appreciate the systematic nature of what I had accomplished. From the kitchen, we could hear Detective Morrison calling for us. Mrs. Ashford, could you and your son rejoin us, please? I stood up, carefully gathering all the documents back into their envelope. Derek, I need you to understand something very important. What's that, Mom? I never wanted it to come to this. For months, I kept hoping I was wrong about Cassandra, that there was some innocent explanation for her behavior. I documented everything as insurance, hoping I'd never need to use it. Derek stood up beside me, his face showing a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. But she forced your hand when she called Dr. Harrison's office. Actually, I said with a slight smile, she forced my hand when I heard her laughing about my supposed senility this morning. Up until then, I thought maybe she was just careless or confused about medications. But when I heard her bragging about slowly killing me while stealing from you decided it was time to end this. I decided it was time for Cassandra to learn that underestimating Dr. Beatrice Ashford was the biggest mistake she could possibly make. As we walked back toward the kitchen, Derek shook his head in amazement. Mom, you realize you've probably just solved one of the most complex elder abuse cases Detective Morrison has ever seen? I certainly hope so. Because what we've shown them so far is just the beginning. Wait until they see what else I've been documenting. When Derek and I returned to the kitchen, the scene had transformed completely. Detective Morrison was sitting across from Cassandra at my dining table with a tape recorder between them, while one of the uniformed officers stood nearby taking notes. Cassandra's hands were cuffed in front of her, and her earlier tears had been replaced by a cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. Mrs. Ashford, Detective Morrison said as we entered, your daughter-in-law has been making some interesting claims about your mental state. She's suggesting that you've been confused about your medications and that she was trying to help by simplifying your pill regimen. I looked at Cassandra with what I hoped appeared to be hurt bewilderment. Confused. But Cassandra, you told me these were the same medications Dr. Harrison prescribed, just from a different pharmacy.
I was trying to protect you, Cassandra said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. You've been so scattered lately, forgetting appointments, repeating yourself. I thought if you took fewer pills, you might feel clearer mentally. Detective Morrison raised an eyebrow. So you replaced life-saving cardiac medication with sugar pills to help with mental clarity? It's not that simple, Cassandra protested. Beatrice has been declining for months. Sometimes she doesn't even remember conversations we had the day before. Derek's been worried about her cognitive state. Derek stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. That's a lie, Cassandra. I never said Mom was having cognitive problems. Mrs. Ashford, Detective Morrison said, turning to me. Your son mentioned you had some additional documentation you wanted to share. Yes, I said, handing her the manila envelope. I've been keeping some records because certain things were concerning me. Detective Morrison opened the envelope and began examining the contents.
As she flipped through the photographs, financial records, and audio equipment, her professional composure gave way to obvious surprise. "Mrs. Ashford, this is remarkably comprehensive documentation. How long have you been collecting this evidence?" "About 3 months, since I first noticed discrepancies between what Dr. Harrison prescribed and what I was actually being given." Cassandra's face went pale. "What do you mean, discrepancies? I gave you exactly what the doctor prescribed." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the recording from that morning. "Detective Morrison, I think you should hear this." As Cassandra's voice filled the room, bragging to her friend about replacing my medication with sugar pills and laughing about my supposed senility, the atmosphere became electric with tension. Cassandra's carefully constructed defense crumbled before our eyes. "She's too senile to notice anyway," her recorded voice said clearly. "The old bat thinks she's taking her precious pills, but I've been saving us hundreds of dollars every month." Derek made a sound of disgust. "Saving us money? Cassandra, you could have killed her." "That recording is taken out of context," Cassandra said desperately. "I was just venting to a friend about the stress of caregiving." Detective Morrison stopped the recording. "Mrs. Cassandra Ashford, you just admitted on tape to deliberately replacing life-saving cardiac medication with placebos while referring to the victim in derogatory terms. How exactly is that taken out of context?" I pulled out another folder from the envelope. "Detective Morrison, there's something else you should know. I've been tracking unusual financial activity on my accounts." As I spread the bank statements and credit card bills across the table, Detective Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim. She pointed to a highlighted charge. "This is a $15,000 payment to Sunset Travel Agency. Mrs. Ashford, did you authorize this expense?" "I did not," I said firmly, and when I called the travel agency to inquire, they told me the reservation was for a 3-week luxury vacation to Bali for Mr. and Mrs. Derek Ashford. Derek stared at his wife in shock. "Bali? Cassandra, we never discussed any trip to Bali." "It was supposed to be a surprise," Cassandra said weakly, "for our anniversary." "A surprise paid for with stolen money from my dying mother? A surprise vacation while you were slowly murdering the woman who welcomed you into our family?" Detective Morrison was making rapid notes. "Mrs. Ashford, are there other unauthorized charges?" I pointed to several highlighted entries. Regular transfers to cover what Cassandra claimed were medical expenses that never appeared on any actual medical bills. Purchases of expensive jewelry and designer clothes charged to my credit card, and here, I pointed to a particularly large charge, a $5,000 payment to Whittemore and Associates. "Who are Whittemore and Associates?" the agency asked. "Estate planning attorneys," I replied. According to their receptionist, someone claiming to be Derek's wife had been trying to schedule consultations about updating my will. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek was staring at Cassandra with an expression of complete revulsion, while Detective Morrison was rapidly calculating the scope of the crime she was uncovering. "Mrs. Cassandra Ashford," Detective Morrison said formally, "in addition to the charges of elder abuse and medication tampering, you're now looking at potential charges of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder." "Murder?" Cassandra's voice cracked. "I never tried to murder anyone." Dr. Harrison, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashford requires digoxin to maintain normal heart rhythm. Without it, she faces significant risk of cardiac arrhythmia, which can be fatal. By deliberately withholding this medication while the patient believed she was receiving proper treatment, you created a situation where sudden cardiac death was not just possible, but likely." "But she looks fine," Cassandra protested. "She's been healthy for months." I allowed myself a small smile. "That's because I haven't actually been taking the pills you gave me for the past 10 weeks. The room went completely silent. Cassandra stared at me with dawning horror. "What did you say?" I said, I haven't been taking your sugar pills, I repeated calmly. I've been palming them and taking my real medication separately.
Detective Morrison leaned forward with intense interest. Mrs. Ashford, are you telling us that you've been aware of the medication substitution this entire time? I became suspicious about 6 weeks after Cassandra moved in, I explained. Her medical knowledge seemed limited for someone claiming to be a registered nurse. When I started feeling better after taking her pills instead of worse, I realized something was wrong. Cassandra's face was cycling through expressions of disbelief, rage, and panic. You've been faking this whole time? The confusion, the gratitude, all of it? I've been documenting your crimes, I corrected. I needed evidence before I could make accusations. False allegations of elder abuse are serious matters. Derek was looking at me with something approaching awe. Mom, you've been running your own investigation for months? 27 years of practicing medicine teaches you to be thorough, and it teaches you that the most dangerous people are often the ones who appear most helpful. Detective Morrison was shaking her head in amazement. Mrs. Ashford, in 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen a victim collect such comprehensive evidence of the crimes being committed against them. I pulled out one final folder from the envelope. Detective Morrison, there's one more thing you should see. This folder contained printouts of phone records, showing multiple calls between Cassandra and various numbers I traced to payday loan companies, credit consolidation services, and bankruptcy attorneys. It appears that Mrs. Cassandra Ashford has been experiencing significant financial difficulties, I explained. According to these records, she owes approximately $43,000 in credit card debt and has been seeking ways to consolidate or discharge these obligations. Cassandra slumped in her chair, finally understanding that her perfect plan had been turned completely against her. How did you get my phone records? I didn't, I said simply. But when someone uses my home Wi-Fi to make calls through internet-based services, those calls can be traced through the network logs that Derek set up for security purposes. Derek nodded slowly. Mom asked me to install network monitoring software months ago. She said she was worried about identity theft. Detective Morrison closed her notebook and stood up. Mrs. Cassandra Ashford, you're under arrest for elder abuse, medication tampering, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Cassandra her rights again, this time with the full scope of charges, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The woman who had spent months laughing about my supposed senility while slowly trying to kill me was finally facing the consequences of underestimating her victim. But more than that, she was about to discover that her nightmare was just beginning. As the police officers led Cassandra toward the front door, she suddenly twisted around in their grip, her face contorted with rage. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law had finally slipped completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "You vindictive old witch!" she screamed at me, her voice echoing through the house. "You planned this whole thing! You set me up!" One of the officers tightened his grip on her arm. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." "Calm down?" Cassandra's voice rose to a shriek. "She's been playing games with me for months, recording me, spying on me, pretending to be senile while she gathered evidence like some kind of detective." Derek stepped protectively in front of me. "Cassandra, stop it. You tried to murder my mother." "I was trying to help her." Cassandra struggled against the handcuffs. "Do you have any idea how expensive those medications are? Do you know what it costs to keep an elderly person alive when they're just going to die anyway?" The casual cruelty of her words hit Derek like a physical blow. I saw him actually stagger backward, his face pale with shock at hearing his wife's true feelings about my life. Detective Morrison moved closer to Cassandra. "Mrs. Ashford, I strongly advise you to stop talking until you have legal representation." "Legal representation with what money?" She laughed bitterly. "She's been monitoring my finances for months. She knows I can't afford a decent lawyer." I stepped forward slightly, my voice calm and measured. "Cassandra, I've been monitoring my own finances. The $43,000 in debt you've accumulated, the unauthorized charges to my credit cards, the money you stole to book that Bali vacation, those were your choices, not mine." "You don't understand," Cassandra said, her voice becoming pleading now as she turned to Derek.
Your mother is rich, Derek. Really rich. She has investments, properties, savings accounts you don't even know about. What difference would it make if she died a few months earlier? We could have had such a beautiful life together. Derek's expression moved beyond shock into something approaching horror. You were planning to kill my mother for money? You married me to get access to her wealth? I married you because I love you, Cassandra protested. But her voice lacked conviction. The money was just a bonus. We deserve to be happy, Derek. We deserve nice things.
We deserve? Derek's voice was dangerously quiet. We deserve to commit murder for designer handbags and luxury vacations? Dr. Harrison, who had been documenting everything for his medical report, looked up from his notes. Mrs. Cassandra Ashford, as a medical professional, I'm required to inform you that your actions could have resulted in Mrs. Ashford's death within days if she had actually been taking the placebo pills you provided. Her cardiac condition requires precise medication management. But she wasn't taking them, Cassandra said desperately. She just admitted she wasn't taking them, so no harm was done. Detective Morrison shook her head. Intent to commit murder is still attempted murder, regardless of whether the victims successfully protected themselves. As they reached the front door, Cassandra made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Derek, please, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your wife. We took vows. Derek stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the afternoon sunlight. Yes, we did take vows. You promised to love and honor me through sickness and health. You also promised to be part of my family, which meant caring for my mother, not murdering her. I wasn't murdering her, Cassandra's voice cracked with hysteria. I was trying to... You were trying to steal from an elderly woman while slowly killing her. You were trying to make me complicit in your crimes by booking vacations with stolen money and planning to spend my mother's estate before she was even dead. The police officers resumed walking toward their patrol car, but Cassandra's voice carried clearly across the front yard. You'll regret this, Derek, when you're stuck taking care of her for the next 20 years, spending all your money on medical bills and nursing homes. You'll remember that I offered you a way out. Derek didn't respond. Instead, he closed the front door firmly and turned back to me, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. Mom, I'm so sorry. I brought that woman into your home, into our family. I nearly got you killed because I was too blind to see what she really was. I moved to him and took his hands in mine. Derek, you couldn't have known. Cassandra is clearly skilled at manipulation and deception. She fooled a lot of people, not just you. Detective Morrison was still in the kitchen, organizing the evidence I'd provided. Mrs. Ashford, I need to ask you something. When did you first suspect that Mrs. Cassandra Ashford's feelings for your son weren't genuine? I considered the question carefully. About 2 months after she moved in. Derek was traveling for work, and I overheard her on the phone with someone talking about playing the long game and how the old lady would be easier to handle than expected. At the time, I thought she might be talking about a work situation, but combined with her other behavior? What other behavior? The detective asked. She was constantly asking questions about my financial situation, my investments, my will. She claimed to be helping me organize my papers, but I noticed she was particularly interested in documents related to my assets. She also started suggesting that Derek and I should consider what would happen if my health declined further. Dr. Harrison looked up from his medical notes. Mrs. Ashford, given the systematic nature of the medication substitution, I believe Mrs. Cassandra Ashford may have been planning this for longer than 3 months. The confidence with which she handled your medications suggests she'd researched cardiac care extensively. I agree, I said. I think Cassandra targeted our family specifically because she'd identified me as a wealthy, elderly woman with a devoted son, but naive son. Derek's social media posts about my heart attack made me look like an ideal victim.
Derek sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. "She met me through a dating app 3 months after your heart attack. She said she was drawn to me because I was such a caring son, always posting about my love for my family." Detective Morrison made a note. "That suggests premeditation. She may have been researching potential targets for months before she approached your son. The implications of this revelation settled over us like a dark cloud. Cassandra hadn't fallen in love with Derek and gradually decided to steal from his mother. She had identified me as a target and deliberately seduced my son as part of a long-term plan to access my wealth. Derek," I said gently, "I need you to understand that none of this is your fault. You were as much a victim of her scheme as I was. But I should have seen it. The way she was always interested in your money, always asking about your health, always eager to take over your care. I should have questioned it." Detective Morrison closed her notebook. "Mr. Ashford, predators like your wife are experts at manipulation. They're skilled at presenting themselves as exactly what their victims want to see. Your desire to find love and your concern for your mother's well-being made you an ideal target for her scheme."
As the detective gathered her materials to leave, she turned to me with obvious admiration. "Mrs. Ashford, I have to say, in 3 decades of investigating elder abuse cases, I've never seen anything like the evidence collection you've done. You've essentially solved this case for us." "I had good motivation," I replied, "and excellent training. 40 years in medicine teaches you to document everything and trust your instincts." After Detective Morrison left, Derek and I sat in the suddenly quiet kitchen. The events of the day felt surreal. This morning, I'd been pretending to be a confused elderly woman taking fake medication, and now Cassandra was in custody facing multiple felony charges. "Mom," Derek said finally, "what happens now?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Now we move forward. You file for divorce, I work with the prosecutor's office to ensure Cassandra faces appropriate consequences for her crimes, and we figure out how to rebuild trust between us." Derek looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Can you forgive me for bringing her into your life?" "Derek," I said firmly, "there's nothing to forgive. You loved someone who didn't deserve it. That speaks well of your heart, not poorly of your judgment." But as we sat there in the aftermath of Cassandra's arrest, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The legal proceedings would drag on for months, and Derek would have to confront the reality that everything he believed about his marriage had been a lie designed to facilitate my murder. 3 days after Cassandra's arrest, Detective Morrison called to inform me that the investigation had uncovered far more than we had initially realized. She asked Derek and me to come to the police station to review additional evidence that had emerged during their search of Cassandra's personal belongings and digital devices. The conference room at Millbrook Valley Police Department felt sterile and official, with its fluorescent lights and gray walls lined with filing cabinets. Detective Morrison sat across from us with a thick folder and a laptop computer, her expression more serious than I'd seen during her initial investigation. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford, what we've discovered goes far beyond the medication tampering and financial fraud we initially uncovered. I'm afraid your wife, Mr. Ashford, appears to have been running a much more sophisticated operation than any of us suspected." Derek leaned forward in his chair. "What do you mean, more sophisticated?" Detective Morrison opened her laptop and turned the screen toward us. She found extensive files on Mrs. Ashford's computer, not just about your family, but about at least 6 other elderly individuals in the Tri-County area. The spreadsheet showed names, addresses, ages, estimated net worth, family situations, and health conditions. My name was at the top of the list. But below it were 5 other women, all over 70, all recently widowed, all with substantial assets. "She's done this before," I said quietly, the full scope of Cassandra's criminality beginning to sink in. "We believe so," Detective Morrison confirmed. "We're currently investigating the deaths of 2 women on this list, Margaret Chen and Victoria Blackwood. Both died of apparent cardiac events within the past 18 months, and both had been receiving caregiving assistance from women that match Mrs. Cassandra Ashford's description, though she was using different names." Derek went pale. "Are you saying Cassandra has killed other people?"
We're saying we're investigating suspicious deaths that may be connected to your wife's pattern of behavior, the detective corrected carefully. But what we found on her computer suggests that she's been researching and targeting vulnerable elderly women for at least 2 years. Detective Morrison clicked to another file, this one containing detailed notes about each potential victim. The entry about me was chilling in its clinical detachment. Beatrice Ashford, 73, widowed cardiologist, estimated assets $2.3 million, one son, Derek, 35, software engineer, recently divorced, emotionally vulnerable. Target acquisition through son, preliminary assessment, high trust, minimal family oversight, significant pharmaceutical dependency. Target acquisition, Derek repeated, his voice hollow. She wrote about our family like we were a business plan. That's essentially what you were to her, Detective Morrison said grimly. Look at this timeline she created. The next document was a month-by-month plan detailing Cassandra's strategy. Meet Derek through a dating app, assess family dynamics, gain trust, move into household, establish medication control, begin asset transfer, accelerate medical decline, and finally, in her own chilling words, natural death, inheritance to son, marriage access to full estate. She planned the entire relationship, Derek said, staring at the screen in disbelief. Every conversation, every gesture, every "I love you," it was all calculated to get her closer to Mom's money.
Detective Morrison nodded. What's particularly disturbing is the level of research she did. She knew about your mother's medical history, her financial situation, even her personality traits before she ever met you. I studied the document with the clinical detachment my medical training had taught me. How did she obtain my medical information? We're still investigating that, but we found evidence that she may have gained access to medical records through a contact at Metropolitan General Hospital, where she claimed to have worked. It appears she was never actually employed there, but she may have had a relationship with someone who was. Derek put his head in his hands. This is unbelievable. How could I have been so blind? Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Ashford, you need to understand that your wife is what we call a professional predator. This wasn't some crime of opportunity. This was a carefully planned operation by someone who has likely been doing this for years. She pulled out a printed email exchange from the folder. We found these communications between Mrs. Ashford and someone using the email address rchen2019@email.com. We believe this may be the same Rachel she was speaking with when your mother overheard her confession. The emails detailed strategies for managing elderly targets, including advice on medication substitution, financial manipulation, and timeline management for natural conclusion of care. The language was so coldly clinical that it read like a manual for elder abuse. There are at least 3 other women involved in this network. We've issued warrants for their arrest, but so far they've proven elusive. I felt a chill run down my spine. You're describing an organized conspiracy to murder elderly people for their assets. That's exactly what we're describing, the detective confirmed. And based on the evidence we found, Mrs. Ashford may have been one of the most successful operators in this network. Derek looked up from the emails, his face stricken. How many people has she killed? We don't know yet, but we've identified at least 4 suspicious deaths in the past 3 years that match her methodology. All elderly women, all with significant assets, all who died of apparent medical complications while receiving care from women who later disappeared. Detective Morrison turned to a new page in the folder. Mrs. Ashford, there's something else you need to see. We found extensive surveillance notes about your daily routine, your relationships, your habits. She was watching you far more closely than even you realized. The notes were disturbingly detailed. Subject takes morning walk at 7:30 a.m., returns via Maple Street.
stops to chat with neighbors Thompson and Rodriguez, potential witnesses to eliminate. Tuesday shopping routine includes pharmacy pickup, opportunity for medication switch. Evening routine includes sewing room time 8 to 9 p.m., location for real medication storage. She knew about my sewing room, I said, feeling violated in a way I hadn't expected. She knew I was hiding my real medications there. But she never acted on that information, Derek pointed out. Why not? Detective Morrison consulted her notes. Based on her timeline, she was planning to discover your medication hiding place next month as part of building a case for your declining mental state. She intended to present it as evidence that you were confused about your medications and couldn't be trusted to manage them yourself. The sophistication of Cassandra's planning was breathtaking in its malevolence. She hadn't just been trying to kill me, she'd been laying the groundwork to gaslight me and anyone who might question her story about my declining health. There's more, Detective Morrison said, pulling out a series of photographs. We found these on her phone. Pictures of your house, your possessions, your important documents. She was cataloging your assets and planning their disposal. The photos showed my jewelry, artwork, and even Harold's collection of rare books. Each image was annotated with estimated values and potential sale venues. She was planning to sell everything, Derek said, his voice filled with disgust. Not just sell, Detective Morrison corrected. According to her notes, she was planning to gradually remove items while you were still alive, claiming they were being donated or stored for safekeeping. By the time of your death, most of your valuable possessions would have already been liquidated. I studied the photographs of my belongings, each one representing a memory, a piece of the life Harold and I had built together. The thought of Cassandra systematically stealing and selling these treasures while I was still alive felt almost worse than the attempt on my life. What happens now? Derek asked. Now we build the strongest possible case against Mrs. Ashford and her associates. With Mrs. Ashford's evidence and what we found on the computer, we have enough to charge her with conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud, and attempted murder. If we can connect her to the other suspicious deaths, we'll be looking at first-degree murder charges. Derek turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Mom, if you hadn't been documenting everything, if you hadn't been so careful,
I'd be dead, I finished simply. And Cassandra would be planning your murder next, once she'd gained access to whatever inheritance she thought I'd left you. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what we learned. Cassandra hadn't just been a greedy daughter-in-law trying to steal from one elderly woman. She'd been part of an organized network of predators systematically targeting and murdering vulnerable seniors across multiple states. And I had been next on their list. 6 months after Cassandra's arrest, Derek and I sat in the Victim Impact Preparation Room at the Millbrook County Courthouse. Her trial was set to begin the following week, and the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Winters, was reviewing our statements one final time. The months between Cassandra's arrest and trial had been a profound adjustment for both Derek and me. What had started as a simple case of medication tampering had evolved into a federal investigation spanning 4 states and involving the deaths of 7 elderly women. Cassandra had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty, and her testimony had led to the arrest of 6 other members of what the FBI now called the Sunshine Network, a reference to their targeting of seniors in retirement communities. Derek, Ms. Winters said gently, I know this has been incredibly difficult for you. How are you handling the emotional aspects of testifying against your wife? Derek looked older than his 35 years. The past 6 months had aged him in ways that were visible not just in the gray threads appearing in his hair,
but in the cautious way he now approached relationships and trust. He'd been attending therapy twice a week, working through what his counselor termed complex betrayal trauma. "I've come to understand that I never really knew Cassandra at all," Derek said slowly. "The woman I thought I loved never existed. She was a character created specifically to manipulate me into providing access to my mother." It was true. As more evidence had emerged during the investigation, we'd learned that even Cassandra's name was fabricated. Her real name was Carol Sue Brennan, and she had a criminal history dating back 15 years, including previous convictions for identity theft and insurance fraud. The nursing credentials she'd claimed were completely fictitious. She'd never worked in healthcare at all. "Mrs. Ashford," Ms. Winters turned to me, "the defense is likely to argue that your systematic evidence collection shows you were never truly in danger since you were aware of the medication substitution. How do you respond to that?" I had been preparing for this question for months. I would respond that being forced to secretly protect yourself from someone trying to murder you while living in your own home constitutes severe psychological trauma regardless of whether the murder attempt succeeded. I spent 3 months wondering each morning if today would be the day I made a mistake and actually swallowed the pills that could kill me. It was true. Despite my medical training and careful planning, there had been several close calls where I'd nearly taken the fake medication by accident. Once when I was distracted by a phone call, another time when I was fighting off a minor flu and wasn't thinking clearly. The constant vigilance required to stay alive while appearing helpless had taken a toll I was still processing. Derek reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom, I still can't believe you lived with that stress for months without telling me. I wish you had trusted me enough to share what was happening." "Derek," I used the patient tone I'd perfected during our many conversations about this topic, "if I had told you my suspicions without evidence, what would you have done?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I probably would have confronted Cassandra directly." "And then what would have happened?" "She would have denied everything, told me you were getting paranoid and confused, and I might have believed her." Derek's voice was heavy with the weight of this realization. "I might have actually helped her convince you to take even more medication to help with your supposed mental decline." Ms. Winters nodded approvingly. That's exactly why Mrs. Ashford's methodical approach was so crucial. Without documentation, these cases often become he said, she said situations where the alleged perpetrator's word carries as much weight as the victim's. The prosecutor pulled out a thick folder containing what had become known as the Ashford evidence, my months of careful documentation that had not only saved my life, but had become the cornerstone of the federal investigation. Law enforcement agencies were now using my methods as a training model for other potential victims of elder abuse. "Mrs. Ashford," Ms. Winters continued, "the FBI has asked me to inform you that your evidence collection techniques are being incorporated into their elder abuse prevention training programs. Apparently, your systematic approach has become something of a gold standard." I felt a complex mix of pride and sadness at this news. I'm glad something positive can come from this experience, but I wish the training wasn't necessary.
Derek had been working through his own complex feelings about his role in the situation. His therapy sessions had helped him understand that he, too, had been a victim of Cassandra's manipulation, but accepting that intellectually was different from feeling it emotionally. "The hardest part," Derek told Miss Winters, "is realizing that every moment of what I thought was my marriage was a performance. Every I love you, every shared laugh, every intimate conversation. She was just playing a role to get closer to my mother's money." During the investigation, we'd learned that Cassandra had kept detailed notes on Derek's personality, preferences, and emotional vulnerabilities. She'd crafted her entire persona based on psychological profiles, designed to make her irresistible to a recently divorced man seeking companionship and someone to help care for his aging mother. "The FBI behavioral analyst explained it to me," Derek continued. "Cassandra studied me like a scientist studying a lab rat.
She knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to make me fall in love with her, trust her, and ultimately give her access to Mom. One of the most disturbing discoveries had been Cassandra's relationship manual, a detailed guide she'd written for other members of the Sunshine Network on how to seduce adult children of wealthy elderly targets. The manual included psychological manipulation techniques, common emotional vulnerabilities to exploit, and timelines for gaining complete access to the target's finances and medical care. "Derek," Miss Winters said, "Dr. Patterson, the FBI psychologist, wants to make sure you understand that recognizing this level of manipulation isn't something most people would be capable of. These individuals are essentially professional con artists who have spent years perfecting their techniques." I watched my son struggle with this concept. In the months since Cassandra's arrest, Derek had thrown himself into understanding how he'd been manipulated, reading everything he could find about psychological manipulation, attending support groups for victims of sociopathic abuse, and working with his therapist to rebuild his ability to trust his own judgment. "The hardest part," Derek said, "is that I keep second-guessing every relationship now. I find myself analyzing every interaction, wondering if people are being genuine or if they're trying to manipulate me. It's exhausting." His therapist had warned us that this hypervigilance was a normal response to betrayal trauma, but that it would likely take years for Derek to feel comfortable trusting people again, especially in romantic relationships. "What's helped me," I offered, "is focusing on the fact that we survived this. Cassandra's plan failed because we were both stronger and smarter than she anticipated. She thought she was dealing with a senile old woman and her naive son, but she underestimated both of us." Miss Winters smiled. "Mrs. Ashford, the investigating agents have told me that your case has already led to the identification of at least 12 other potential victims who are now aware they may be targets. Your decision to fight back instead of becoming a victim has likely saved multiple lives." It was true. The publicity surrounding Cassandra's arrest had prompted several other families to come forward with concerns about suspicious caregivers. The FBI had been able to prevent at least 3 other murders and had identified a network of predators operating across the southeastern United States. "There's something else," Miss Winters said, consulting her notes. "Cassandra has requested to speak with both of you before the trial begins. She's not required to do this, and you're not required to agree, but she claims she wants to apologize and explain her actions." Derek's response was immediate. "Absolutely not. I never want to see her again." I considered the request more carefully. What would be the purpose of such a meeting? According to her attorney, she wants to provide closure and help you both understand that her actions weren't personal. She claims she's found religion in prison and wants to make amends. Derek laughed bitterly. "Not personal? She tried to murder my mother while stealing from our family. How much more personal could it get?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who had shared my home, eaten at my table, and plotted my death while smiling at me every morning. "Miss Ashford, do you believe her claim about wanting to make amends?" The prosecutor shook her head. "Honestly, based on the psychological evaluation, I think this is another manipulation attempt. Cassandra is facing multiple life sentences, and she may be hoping that showing remorse will somehow benefit her situation." "Then no," I said firmly. "I have no interest in providing Cassandra with another opportunity to manipulate us. We've learned everything we need to know about her true nature." As we prepared to leave the courthouse, Derek turned to me with an expression I'd been seeing more frequently, a mixture of admiration and sorrow. "Mom, I keep thinking about how different things would have been if you hadn't been so careful, so smart about documenting everything."
"Derek," I replied, "I keep thinking about how proud your father would be of the way you've handled all of this. You were manipulated by a professional criminal, but when you learned the truth, you chose to protect me instead of your wife. That speaks to the man you are, not the man she tried to make you." The trial would begin soon, and Cassandra would finally face the consequences of her crimes. But the real healing, for both Derek and me, was happening slowly, day by day, as we learned to trust ourselves and each other again. 1 year after Cassandra's sentencing to 3 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, Derek and I stood in the kitchen of my home on Maple Grove Lane, preparing Sunday dinner together. It had become our weekly tradition, a way of reclaiming the space that had once felt tainted by betrayal.
and turning it back into a place of family connection. "Mom, can you hand me the oregano?" Derek asked, stirring the pasta sauce he'd been perfecting over the past few months. Cooking had become his new therapy, a way of creating something nurturing and positive in the same kitchen where we'd discovered his wife's attempt to murder me. I reached into the spice cabinet, noting how different everything felt now. The simple act of taking my real medications each morning, openly and without fear, still brought me a small sense of triumph. The pill organizer sat on the counter next to Derek's coffee maker, no longer a weapon in someone else's hands, but simply a tool for managing my health. "You know," I said, watching Derek work, "your father would have loved seeing you cook like this. He always said cooking was an act of love." Derek smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression I'd seen from him in months. I think I'm finally starting to understand what he meant. There's something healing about creating something good for someone you care about. The past year had been one of profound transformation for both of us. Derek's divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, a surprisingly straightforward process since Cassandra was serving multiple life sentences and had few assets to claim. He'd decided to sell his downtown condo and move back into his childhood bedroom, at least temporarily, while we both adjusted to our new reality. I got a call from Detective Morrison yesterday. I mentioned setting the table with the good china that we'd started using for our Sunday dinners. Life was too short, we'd decided, to save the beautiful things for special occasions. Oh, any updates on the other cases? The Sunshine Network prosecution is finally complete. With Cassandra's testimony, they were able to convict all 6 remaining members. The FBI estimates they prevented at least 23 additional murders by shutting down the network. Derek paused in his stirring. 23 people who are alive because you fought back instead of becoming a victim. It was a staggering number, one that I still struggled to fully comprehend. My decision to document Cassandra's crimes instead of confronting her directly not only saved my own life, but exposed an entire network of predators who had been systematically murdering elderly people across multiple states. "There's more," I continued. "The FBI wants to interview me for a documentary they're making about elder abuse prevention. Apparently, my evidence collection methods have become part of their standard training protocol for potential victims." Derek turned from the stove, his eyes bright with pride. "Mom, do you realize you've basically revolutionized how law enforcement approaches these cases?" It was true, though it felt surreal to think about. The systematic documentation techniques I'd used, photographing medications, recording conversations, tracking financial irregularities, and maintaining detailed timelines, had become the gold standard for elder abuse investigations. Law enforcement agencies across the country were now training potential victims to recognize and document suspicious behavior instead of simply hoping for the best. Dr. Harrison called this morning, too. He wants me to speak at the state medical conference next month about recognizing medication tampering from a physician's perspective. Are you going to do it? I considered the question. Public speaking had never been my favorite aspect of medical practice, but sharing information that could save lives felt like a responsibility I couldn't ignore. I think so. If talking about what happened to us can help even one other family avoid this nightmare, it's worth the discomfort. Derek brought the pasta to the table, and we sat down to eat in the dining room where Cassandra had once sat, planning my death while pretending to care about my well-being. But the room felt different now, lighter somehow, as if honesty had purged the shadows that deception had cast. "I have some news too," Derek said, serving us both generous portions. "I've been thinking about making some changes in my life." "What kind of changes?" "I want to go back to school, maybe get a degree in counseling or social work. I think I want to work with other people who've been victims of manipulation and fraud." I felt a warm rush of pride at his words.
Derek had spent the past year not just healing from his own trauma, but developing a deep understanding of how predators operate and how victims can recover from sophisticated manipulation. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What made you decide on that direction? The support groups I've been attending, Derek explained. I've met so many people who've been through similar experiences: romance scams, investment fraud, family manipulation. There's such a need for counselors who really understand how these criminals operate. Derek had indeed become something of an expert on manipulation tactics through his own healing process. His therapist had suggested he consider peer counseling, noting that his insight into how predators target and groom their victims could be invaluable in helping other survivors. Plus, Derek continued with a slight smile, I figure I have a pretty good teacher when it comes to systematic evidence collection and documentation. I laughed, remembering how Derek had initially been amazed by my methodical approach to gathering proof of Cassandra's crimes. You always were a quick learner. As we ate, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning when I'd overheard Cassandra laughing about my supposed senility. The woman who had tried to kill me was now spending the rest of her life in federal prison. The network of criminals she'd been part of had been dismantled, and Derek and I had emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed appreciation for the importance of family. Mom, Derek said, interrupting my thoughts, can I ask you something I've been wondering about? Of course. Do you ever regret not confronting Cassandra earlier before things went as far as they did? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past year. Sometimes I wonder if I could have prevented some of the emotional damage to you by exposing her sooner, I said honestly. But then I remember that without comprehensive evidence, she might have talked her way out of the charges. She might have convinced you that I was paranoid and confused, and she might have gone on to hurt other people. Derek nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that too. As much as it hurts to know that our entire marriage was a lie, I'm grateful that you were thorough enough to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else. What I regret most is that someone like Cassandra exists in the world at all, but what I'm proud of is that we were strong enough and smart enough to stop her. After dinner, we walked through the garden together, looking at the flowers Harold had planted years ago and that I'd continued to tend. The roses were blooming beautifully, their fragrance filling the evening air with sweetness that seemed to chase away any lingering shadows from our ordeal. You know, Derek said, I think Dad would be proud of how we handled all this. We protected each other, we fought back against someone who tried to destroy our family, and we came out stronger. I think you're right, I agreed. Your father always said that the measure of a person isn't whether they face difficulties, but how they respond when they do. As we headed back inside, Derek paused at the front door. Mom, I want you to know that despite everything Cassandra put us through, I'm grateful for one thing. What's that? It showed me what an incredible woman my mother really is. I always knew you were strong and smart, but watching you outmaneuver a professional criminal while protecting both of us, it made me realize I come from truly remarkable people. Standing there on the porch of the home I'd shared with Harold for so many years, surrounded by the garden we'd planted together, and looking at the son we'd raised to be a good man, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: complete peace. Cassandra had tried to steal my life, my assets, and my family's future. Instead, she'd given us something unexpected: a deeper appreciation for each other and an unshakable confidence in our ability to face whatever challenges might come. The woman who had called me senile while plotting my murder had learned the hard way that underestimating Dr. Beatrice Ashford was a mistake she'd spend the rest of her life regretting. And as Derek and I headed inside to finish up cleaning up from our Sunday dinner, I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, surrounded by people who love you for who you really are, not what they think they can take from you.